Proud to welcome you to this April 11th fiscal year 18 budget workshop update. I do believe that we are always slated, particularly because I think we got votes on 3 items today, to accept public comment prior to any decisions being made, and we'll do that before the presentations begin. Are there any speakers?
Mayor, I do not have any speakers. If there are citizens who wish to speak, there are forms in the back next to the red inbox, and somebody will bring them up to me, but I don't see anyone moving that direction, so go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be really brief with these comments. We've got a full presentation for you today on this single item workshop to talk about the budget. It focuses primarily on the development of the fiscal year 19 budget as we try to get ahead of that and discuss the issues that we see forthcoming and get your feedback. In addition to that, there are several items that we're seeking your vote on as it relates to things that you have mentioned in your prior commission meetings. And so we'll want to take a pause at the end and get your action on that. So with that, I'm going to ask our Budget Director, Robert Wiggin, to begin.
Thank you, Reese. Mayor, Commissioners, appointed officials, thanks for your time here this afternoon. I do appreciate that. Our goal today is to discuss the operating budget. The development is directed by history, by current conditions of where we are, and then where we expect to be in the next 5 years. It's directed by your priorities that you've set at your January strategic priority setting session, and then most recently in the last few agenda items that we've presented to talk about the budget. For discussion today, there's some basic parameters like revenue, staffing, and then how we look into the future to plan ahead. And that's where we'll talk about the millage rate and revenues. We'll talk about staffing and compensation, and then 5-year planning. There's also some items, as the city manager indicated, that we'll be asking for your discussion and vote on. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund issue that you asked us to make a recommendation for. We'll bring back that item and discuss that. The Tallahassee Future Leaders Academy was also an item that was requested to be discussed. The Whole Child Leon Early Education Pilot was also an item that was requested to be discussed. And then we have some other timely budget amendments that we want to bring forward as long as we have a budget agenda item. Excuse me. And as you all know, this is all within the context of our priorities for public safety, infrastructure, the economy, and quality of life. The budget plans develop consistently with our available revenue sources. We have taxes for police, parks, human services, which benefit everyone in the community. Rates where users pay based on usage, which is often recognized for their ability to conserve their usage. And then we've got fees where services are provided by choice. As part of the fiscal year 19 revenue landscape, there's a few areas that we want to that we are making some assumptions as we go into preparation for that budget. We know that ad valorem tax rates will remain at 4.1 mils, and any revenues that we realize from new construction will be applied to priorities in public safety and in general government operations. We will have the opportunity to, at the latest date in July, vote on that. Last year, I think we accelerated that vote, and we will do that in our June agenda item again this year. Electric and gas rate studies are proceeding as we have planned. We've got a 5-year rotating schedule calendar. Last year we completed water and sewer, and we're working on electric, gas, and electric and gas rate studies that will be brought forward in June and July with some early results and final results towards the end of the budget cycle. As you well know, water, sewer, stormwater, and fire revenues are up to date and are in place and are acting as we plan for them and performing well. And so we're confident in those revenue sources. Some other operating budget assumptions, city employees perform wide-ranging, highly responsible, customer service-oriented, safe, Public services, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And in the fiscal year 19 budget pro formas, those total positions are established at 2,851 and a half positions. We've arrived at that number and have committed to that number in the fiscal year 19 budget unless rate studies or grant opportunities come about. And we've been able to arrive at that number through reorganizations the past 2 years, where we've identified 56 positions that we've reduced, but we've also then been able to respond to priorities in fire and police over the last 3 years, where we've either identified grant positions or other positions through efficiencies. Collective bargaining unit agreements and efficiencies with staffing are reflected in the compensation amounts that we're estimating, and we also reflect the living wage that we adopted in fiscal year 18 at $12 an hour for the 2019 budget. And then also, lastly, pension and healthcare rates are currently in the pro formas estimated as amounts based on the best information we have now. We expect final numbers in June and July, and we'll work with those to balance budgets for the total personnel compensation packages. As you well know, we compare ourselves and benchmark against similarly provided services in other Florida municipalities. We've discussed this provides us confidence that we're efficient and effective as stewards of the community resources. Our neighbors, our staff, and our economy all benefit from these lower costs, but those costs also have to be responsive, they have to be safe, they have to be reliable, they have to provide a legacy for the future. As you've seen, as we presented in the past, the municipal cost comparison demonstrates that we're in the second to lowest in cost for fire services, for ad valorem taxes, and for other utility services that are provided. The charts to the right there you've seen before. These charts are for residential cost comparisons and demonstrate where we are in relation to other similarly provided municipal services. And then we have also done the same thing for small businesses to ensure that we're cost effective and performing services well for the small businesses. The municipal cost comparison is one perspective that we look at, but it's really a function of long-term planning and the leadership you've provided and the direction you've given us with infrastructure investment. That infrastructure investment is a commitment to long-term, safe, reliable vertical and horizontal assets, their power plants, their pumping stations, their conveyances by pipe, transmission, distribution, quite a bit of vertical and horizontal assets that are out in the community, and those investments are for long-term needs. They demonstrate our commitment to bondholders, and we also then commit to those bondholders to invest ourselves in our infrastructure with transfers from operating budget. And that's part of the debt service payments and the capital transfers that we make on an annual basis. That's an important part of our 5-year planning cycle to make sure that we've got those in place, that we're looking forward to see when the next round of those investments are necessary, and then planning whether it's capital investment and or borrowing that we apply to that circumstance. Another aspect in the 5-year planning cycle, and especially for infrastructure decisions, is having a reserve fund. That reserve fund, identifies revenues that are maintained in special accounts, including accumulated interest earnings, and that amount is more than what's projected to be needed in the budget. We often see that good planning then sets us up for when we have unexpected events. We're able to pre-plan, pre-fund some infrastructure projects. We're able to respond when we have storms so that we get out in advance of whatever impacts we expect to have. And again, it's been critical for us to be able to then respond to the hurricanes, the Hermines and the Irmas that we've been able to to then bring services back to reliable operation quickly. Another aspect of the 5-year planning process, we've got formal policies for those reserves. They've been reviewed, they've been confirmed, and what we've been told is that that primary goal is being met to maintain our AA rating in our bond financing in the utilities and in the general government, and those reserve policies support that approach. Another aspect in 5-year planning is, we look out over the horizon and we see what legislative actions have been taken. One that will be before the voters of the state this year is the homestead exemption constitutional amendment. It's described as a tax cut for the state, but it has some realities behind it. And you asked us to bring back some information on that, and I'd like to share a few comments on that homestead exemption constitutional amendment. As I mentioned, it's up for a vote in November. If it is accepted, then it will go into effect in 2020. The effects of that are the exemption applies to residential property categories. Categories. Those are single-family homes, those are condos, they're mobile homes. What it does not apply to is any of our small businesses, any of our commercial businesses. It doesn't apply to any residences that don't have a homestead exemption, so a second home, for example. It also would not apply to anyone who's been able to take advantage of the first homestead exemption, which brings their property value under $100,000. When we look at that impact, we see about 33% of our residents that will benefit from this amendment should it pass. And the average homeowner, when we look at a average residential property, the benefit would be about $9 a month or $102 a year. The impact.
Would those tend to be the higher end homes, would you say?
I think we've got a cross-section of what the homes are. It's going to be a home that doesn't take the first $50,000 and still has value left for the next $25,000.
Robert, maybe you can remind us, there's a slot that it would apply to, and it's not stacking to where the normal homestead ends today, and I can't remember the slot. You can help me remember that. I think it's either between $125,000 and $150,000 in value.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And so
that's taxable value.
Yes, taxable value. So we're looking at about 48,000 single-family homes in the city limits, and about 21,000 of those have less than $100,000 value. The next slot that Reese is mentioning accounts for another 7,000 or 8,000 homes, and so that's where we get to about the 33% of residents that would be would see a benefit, economic benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Robert.
And what?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. What would that amount be?
When we calculate it on an average home at a median value, we use this in our municipal cost comparison. It's about $9 a month or $102 for an annual amount.
Okay, and what would be the value of the home? Those 33% of home, the average value, if you have that.
Yeah, it would be a home that's $175,000 and above.
$175,000.
And Commissioner, that's taxable value.
Yes.
You know, our taxable values tend to be lower than the market values of the home.
Good point.
Got it. Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. I wanted to nail down that figure a little bit more clearly. So you're saying that a home that has, we're not talking market value here at all.
Correct.
We're talking assessed value. And the assessed value is what's on the books today. And if someone's lived in their home for 20 years and they had Save Our Homes, they probably got a relatively low assessed value versus their market value, correct? And then you take, all right, so now that we've established that number, and let's say the number ends up being $125,000. And then if they take the $50,000 homestead, that would put them underneath the cap. And this figure, the people who benefit from this are assessed after that $50,000 has been subtracted from their assessed value?
No, they would not be eligible for this additional
But I
homestead
mean, is
exemption.
that where the $100,000 comes in? Does it say, so if you had a $150,000 home and you took a $50,000 exemption, you would fall underneath the cap and you would not get this $25,000 exemption? Is that
Correct.
clear?
That's our understanding.
So you'd have to have a relatively higher assessed value than most people have. So what you're saying is that as a result, only about 33% of the homeowners in the city would actually benefit from this?
That, we're looking at residential
Residential
people.
only? Okay.
And yes, it's about 33% that would see a,
All right,
that
thank
would be
you.
able to be eligible for this.
Mr. Mayor,
Ziffer.
takes 60% of the vote to pass this. And this is polling in the high 60s last time I heard. And I would think there would be certain groups that will be campaigning against this. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion this will pass. I know that it's going to hurt the county significantly more than it would us. Planning for the worst is important, but I don't think it can be an assumption that it's going to happen either.
We are looking at what the amount is that would impact our budget. It's directly in our police, in our Parks and Recreation, in our community service areas, and an estimate based on current statistics, it's about $2 million in the general fund.
Commissioner Miller.
All right, I know we're precluded from lobbying, but as far as education is concerned, it seems the people that are not going to get the benefit of this really ought to be able to be told that.
Sure. They will be.
So, but can the city express that information, or?
The city can always provide information, education. We simply just cannot lobby one position or the other.
Yeah, well, I was pretty surprised when I read how the percentages fell out, and what you reported in here was 40%, and then now we're down to 33, so that's pretty interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, it was our realization that when we looked at multifamily homes, that we hadn't represented those as part of the category of where there's no impact, no value to
Mr.
them.
Mayor, I would like to see us develop a robust education plan, because I think it's important for our community that residents be informed about what the actual impact of this is, and who it will benefit, the little that it will benefit them, but what it will cost the city in terms of its ability to provide services. I think that's a worthy thing for us to educate our citizens about.
Yes, sir, we will. We appreciate those comments, and we'll speak clearly to our community because that's who we have the relationship with. But this also will take on a statewide
Right. Oh, I'm sure.
scope, of course, because this will be state vote. But yes, sir, we will.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next 5 items that I'll walk through were City Commission requested to be brought back with some staff recommendations. It will welcome your discussion and vote to take action on these. We can either do them individually or as a group after I've walked through the 5. Please let me know your desires as we proceed. The first item is at the March 21st meeting, the commission voted to direct staff to bring back options related to the modifications of the city's finance policy to direct fiscal year 18 one-time real estate sales revenues and general fund year-end surplus to an affordable housing trust fund. We've looked at the policy. We've evaluated 3 options within those ranges, and the recommendation that we're making is that you approve the use of a combination of real estate sales from the current fiscal year and balances available from this fiscal year's year-end surplus, if it is available, in a not-to-exceed amount for fiscal year 18 of $500,000. What that does is it preserves the deficiencies fund. We don't apply any recurring expenses to that fund, and it remains solvent. It also recognizes that real estate sales are not always recurring and they're not always predictable, but we are able to look at some actions that have been taken and some available funds. And then there's opportunities to leverage available dollars for some pre-planning and some pre-construction decisions with this cap of $500,000 in fiscal year 18.
I'll
We'll
move
take them
staff's
individually.
recommendation.
There's a motion
Second.
and a second. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item number 2, to build on the success of the Tallahassee Future Leaders Academy, at the March 21st meeting, City Commissioner, at the March 21st, 2018 City Commission meeting, the mayor requested consideration of adding up to 50 positions for the 2018 Academy. This would be at a cost of $60,000, and that those 50 positions would be placed in nonprofit human service organizations in the community and paid for by the city.
We'll take those individual. I just want to mention, supplement some of the information here. I mentioned, I think at that meeting that we had over 600 applicants, and we as a commission, I think, have been talking a long time around recognizing that law enforcement is not the only way for us to address some of the interventions around crime. And the emphasis that we put on recruiting candidates for this program, particularly in the red zones of this city, by comparison, I think the incarceration amount for a juvenile over a 6-month period hovers around $68,000 per individual in this state, double that statewide for a year. We want to try to make sure that we equip more people with that opportunity. I'm not, in my own view of this, confined to nonprofit only. There were some other suggestions around connecting with apprenticeship in the trades area, and I think we ought to be open to exploring all of that, but ultimately to make available from the 100 existing slots that we have from the government sponsor to 150.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Commissioner Zephyr.
I agree with you. I think they should be made available for apprenticeships and trades. Those are areas that we, particularly when we consider all the construction that we lately are seeing and approving. I'll make a motion to, with staff's recommendation. Having said that, though, recognizing that I don't want to restrict it just to not-for-profits.
Okay. All right, that's acceptable to me. Commissioner Miller.
Commissioners, after a lot of thought, I've decided that I just can't support this. And it's not that I don't believe that it's a good program, but given the amount I know about it, I just can't vote for something that I know so little about as I know about this program. I don't really know where these kids are. I don't know how they're recruited. I don't know how they're placed. I don't know who in the city is managing all this. I know that we have 2,800 employees, and now, honestly, whether we recognize it or not, we're responsible for this extra 200 and now 250. So without more information, I can't support it. I don't know where they're working, and if you want to put people in nonprofits, then I think we ought to take the 100 that are in City Hall or wherever they're in city government and put them out in the private sector, because that's where they're really going to get a job at the end of the day. And I really think that, we can say there's this particular cost, but everybody who ever had an employee knows that you have to manage that employee, and to have someone drop in and be there for 8 weeks, I'm sure there's something that you can put them to work doing, but your existing staff is going to be supervising them. So that means that the city's existing staff is supervising these 100 that are within the government. So at this point, I'm happy with the 200, but I'm not ready to move to 250.
Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess unlike Commissioner Miller, I have followed this program from the very beginning. I've attended every recruitment program. I've been there for every graduation program. I've visited with these kids at work sites. I understand the recruitment. I know Dr. Williams and our human resources staff have taken an active role in organizing and recruiting these kids and placing them in job sites. So I have the information that I need, Commissioner Miller, because I've taken the personal interest to follow the program since its inception. And so I think that this is a very good recommendation. My concern is that we don't have a private sector business community that has stepped up to the plate. You know, they ought to have as much of an interest in reducing crime and preparing these kids for the workforce as we do as a government. And I have yet to see them step up. I had this conversation with leaders in the business community several years ago and thought they were on board with it. I'm surprised to hear that they're not. And so I would suggest that maybe we engage in some additional conversation with them, our chambers of commerce, to get them involved with this program as well.
Commissioner, I just want to acknowledge again the personal interest and involvement that you've taken. I do want to give credit to some of the private sector businesses individually. The chambers, you're absolutely right about, but the 100 of the 200 positions, 100 of them are offered through the private sector, but they've largely been on individual relationships that have been cultivated with individual businesses. Right. We have tried from the very beginning to try to get, as an association, the chambers to adopt and, you know, pony up positions. That has been less successful, which has caused us to have to go very individually, painstakingly in some cases, to businesses and ask for them to join us. So of the 200, 100 of them right now are private sector, and they're private sector sponsored. And it's my hope that this move will also allow the staff and others, any of us, quite frankly, to help see if we can't get another private sector match here. By our willingness to step up, we were able to get them to step up the next year to do 100. Raising the ante here, maybe we can get them, because the truth is the demand is there, right? That's I think that's important to sort of underscore here, the demand. And when we talk about where these young people are coming from, they're largely coming from and being recruited out of the promise zone area. Right. What we would describe, if you were looking at crime statistics, as the red zones. Not exclusively, but overwhelming majority from those areas. Commissioner Miller.
I wanted also to ask you about how this, I saw in here that these kids now would be in there for 3 years. So how does that mean at the end of the day we got 600 people in the program? I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
I think your staff is here if you want.
I mean, are they going to continue to take 100 or however many a year? How does it?
I hope so.
I can answer that, Commissioner Miller. It's a summer program, so it resets every summer. As the mayor's indicated, the city would do 100, basically internships during the summer of these youth, and in this case, it would increase it by 50. That would be in a nonprofit, but it would reset again next year. So it's not a continuation or an additive number over every summer.
Except that it said that now they would be promised 3 years as opposed to 1. I thought I read that in here. Is that not right?
Every year it resets. Every year the application pool reopens.
Probably I need to have a conversation with Willie, because I know y'all are going to pass this, and I'm going to still continue to want to know.
And my hope is that you all, if you haven't already, would absolutely make yourselves available to Commissioner Miller to maybe walk through a deep dive orientation of where these students are coming from, what they do, how they are vetted, the caliber of young person that we recruit into this program, and also where we have followed them to since its inception, which is important data that you all also have to make available to the commission.
Right. I think that I want to stress that just my opposition at this point to adding 50 is not to be interpreted as I believe this is an excellent program, and I've seen how FSU's come on board and they're getting financial literacy and all that, and I think it's great. I just don't know. And be aware, I mean, to say that I don't know, I know a lot about land use planning. I keep up with the DRC meetings. I help run 6 or so utilities. I can't go and follow and pursue information every time on every single solitary program. So at some point, I believe that we should have an agenda item where somebody reports the information that I know you must have. So, and not only for me, but for the public. So if we could arrange that, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, ma'am.
But in the meantime, we can have our own personal conversation, and you can fill us in my office about all the details and everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Commissioner.
I think Commissioner Miller makes a good point, and maybe at our May meeting before the program launches for the summer, we could have that presentation at that meeting.
I think we could probably arrange to
We'd
put
be
that on
happy
the
to
agenda.
provide that. Yes, sir.
Great. Commissioner
If I
Ziffer.
could suggest, when the presentation is made, maybe a couple of the young people from last year
Sure.
could come and
Sure.
present what their experiences were.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we could do
Commissioners,
it.
there is a motion and a second.
I don't believe there was a second, was there?
Yeah,
I didn't hear it.
Second.
Just want to be sure for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion and a second on the item. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes 4-1. Commissioners, we're now on to item 3.
Commissioners, based on a timeframe change for community schools, Commissioner Ziffer requested funding for Whole Child Leon. It's an early education pilot program. When we requested information from Whole Child Leon, the amount identified was $12,500, and it's to serve the South City and Appalachia Ridge neighborhoods. I think plans are still in formulation. We do have $35,000 allocated in the fiscal year 18 budget for community schools, and we're proposing using that funding that's been extended out for this proposal.
Whole Child's working with Superintendent Hanna and identifying some possible space at Weston Elementary School, which would be co-opt with the things that are already going on there, because I think we all recognize that early childhood, I know, Mayor, this is a very significant issue for you, that early childhood, that 0 to 5 is so vitally important. And so this would give an opportunity for us to hopefully start a program there, and this is the seed money to get that pilot program going.
I'll second the request in the sense that this is an organization that's been hard at work at this, and I actually think that synergies exists across a number of different governmental entities in the private sector. Also, what is happening through the Housing Authority and the purpose-built community there to complement the investment here. Commissioner Miller, followed by Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you. This is pretty exciting, mainly because it's the first real step toward accomplishing the mayor's goals of beginning to address that gap that kids have when they go into school. And I saw that in the newspaper today that there's concerns that assessments haven't been made, and so I was going to ask Commissioner Ziffer if to him this looks like helping to provide some of that information that'll support the assessment data that will support the Children's Council, because one of the comments in the paper today was that there was no assessment of need. And it seems like to me, I mean, I haven't been to all the mayor's conferences, but the first one I went to was enough, believe me. I mean, it was so overwhelming, the information that people have on how important those first years are. I mean, that one of the researchers said that he had been following people for 40 years and you never make up the gap. So if we can figure out a way to get in there in the beginning and really provide assistance to parents and children, I mean, that's really, I think, a huge key to helping kids succeed in the future. But one of the comments was that there was no data assessment, and I hope this will contribute to that, supplying that data to support the council.
Mayor, you go around the state.
Well, I would just say, I mean, the truth is there's overwhelming data.
Yes.
The Abecedarian study that you referenced, the 40-year-long longitudinal study, absolutely in plain English demonstrates that when a kid starts behind, they almost always stay behind. In the state of Florida, 40% of kids are starting kindergarten not ready to learn, largely because of what happened between the ages of 0 and 5, and actually 0 and 3, over 85% of brain development. So I'm not sure what was the person's comment, but the evidence is absolutely clear. And we've also had, since the summit began, the Early Learning Coalition that has been able to get early childhood centers in this city who right now don't have to, but to volunteer to be rated based on their quality. And so they, for 2 years, in our third year now, have gone in and voluntarily rated the quality of care that's accessible at early learning centers in the community. And complete to what we've seen in other cities all around the state and around the country, high-quality early learning, a kid starting kindergarten ready to learn, puts them on the pathway to be ready for third grade reading level, and the trajectory from that the child from that point forward is to the moon. And for a kid with low quality early childhood, they start behind and they almost always stay behind. Commissioner Ziffer, I know you want to answer, and then Commissioner Richardson.
Well, regarding an assessment of the need, if you look at, and I don't believe in the testing that we're doing in schools is necessarily representative of what we ought to be doing, but if you look at that data and you look at schools, particularly elementary schools and so on through our school system, there's a real need for us to be doing more early childhood. The mayor said it. Mayor, what was it, 85%, by 0 to 3, 85% of the brain?
85 by 3.
Right.
That's right.
And so if we're not out there assisting, I think we're continuing to fall behind, because as we all know, if you're not part of the educational process, sooner or later you may, not guarantee, but you may fall into that area where we're having to spend a great deal of dollars from the police side. So we don't want to do that. We want to try to give people a chance. We want to give people a chance for training when it comes to jobs, to get health care, to get housing, and it all starts with, are they prepared when they go to school? And so for anybody that says that we don't have the need, I think there's still a determination what would happen with, and now we're moving into the children's services area, but what happens with those dollars, I think there needs to be a determination where that goes. But as far as a need, there's no question.
Commissioner Richardson,
Yeah.
followed by Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I think it was the Perry Preschool Project that many years ago established those very results that you talked about, Mr. Mayor. And unfortunately, in many communities, ours included, those issues have not been fully supported financially. I mean, we've made some tremendous steps, and particularly given the emphasis that you've put on it, Whole Child Leon, some of the providers in the community, but there's a whole lot more that we can do. We know what the poverty rates in the city of Tallahassee and Leon County are. We know what the health disparities are. We know the educational gaps that exist in this community. We know the dearth of affordable housing in the community. I mean, and the list goes on and on. So for anybody to say that there isn't an assessment, either they have not been following the issue, I don't want to say they've had their heads in the sand, but they just have not educated themselves about what the needs are. There's no question. I don't know that there's any need to delay this any further, collecting more information that we already have that establishes the need for some additional focus on early childhood education in those early years. And so I certainly support this initial effort here, which is, I mean, it's just a scratch on the surface, if you will, $12,500. But I think we have some real opportunities in this community, and certainly when we look at what we've done in investing in our schools with the half-cent sales tax and in our infrastructure improvements through the penny sales tax increase and the extension just recently, this community has said that it's willing to invest in those things that it values. And certainly if we can value infrastructure and school construction, we certainly value our young people, our children, and their future, and investing in that early foundation that we give them.
Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, a few years back, we had the public safety budget that resulted in a tax increase because of our response needed for violent crime primarily. And the police chief appeared before us many times and stressed the need for more officers on the street and highlighted the difficulty of officers having to run from call to call with no time to spare. And many of us have talked about over time adding to the duties of law enforcement officers rather than just strictly law enforcement. And I've always been a strong proponent of allowing law enforcement officers to be law enforcement officers because they had their hands full with that. it would be irresponsible for us to just focus on that end of the problem without focusing on it in the beginning. It is much more cost-effective. Every study has shown it. The data is such that it cannot be argued against. For every dime you spend here, you save thousands on the other end. So to me, this is an absolute no-brainer, and it shows that we have a balanced approach. And this, along with the last item, along with the next item to come, shows that we have focused specifically on where our problem is. We have the data as to where it exists, how it exists, and why it exists. And now the other end of it is, okay, we're doing something about it. And you won't see the results of these seeds planted overnight. You will not see it in one budget cycle. You will not see it in one city commission term or 2 or 3, but you will see it, and it'll make a big impact in the end. So I'm proud to support the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Miller.
I'm proud to support the motion too, and I just want to make sure you understand, I'm not the one that
No,
doesn't
of
think
course,
this
of course.
information out there. I mean, I think that it's just so overwhelming, but this is going to certainly be a very demonstrative step that is going to be focused on assessing local needs. So it will only bolster our argument as to the need for a children's council.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We
Ziffer,
sure can
closing?
get fired up for $12,500, I'll tell you that.
Can. Well placed.
That's very true. All those in favor of the motion, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes unanimously. We're now on to item 4.
Well, as you well know, when we support quality of life, we do that through our community human service partnerships, our funding of COCA, and our funding of outside agencies. Resource Management is making a recommendation that when we make those contributions and that funding priority, that we also then, as part of that, receive sponsorship support from those same entities or those same agencies. They're active in the fundraising, in fundraising as well as being funded through CHSP or COCA or outside.
Just so, because I was confused when I saw this, I'm assuming this is to prevent some of the double dip that's happening.
Yes.
Essentially, we're annual sponsors for different organizations, and then we're going back and being individual table and ticket sponsors for other things.
Yes.
Got it.
And we're making the recommendation that as part of that
It'd be
funding through
included,
CHSP,
sure.
COCA, that we would
Commissioner Miller,
receive
followed by
those.
Commissioner Maddox.
Well, I want to make the motion that we accept staff's recommendation on this, and I have always viewed it as, I would have changed your wording slightly to say sponsorship recognition, because in every case, just about, these organizations are receiving support already, so thank you for bringing this forward.
Commissioner Maddox.
Does this also address multiple sponsorships by departments? I have gone to events that every table was the city of Tallahassee. It was Star Metro, Police Department, Fire Department, Parks and Recreation, Neighborhood Services. Is that addressed? Are we addressing? Okay.
That's our endeavor.
Thank you.
I don't think we have a second.
Yes.
Oh, there is a second. And a third, and a fifth. All those in favor of the motion, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes unanimously. Item 5.
This is just a timely issue. Electric has 2 amendments for capital projects where they have available RR&I funding, and we're asking for an increase in those projects for telecommunication and fiber optic work, and then for $1 million for street lighting work. And they have the available resources in their undesignated fund balance in RR&I.
I'll move staff recommendation, Mr.
Second.
Mayor.
There's a motion and a second on staff recommendation. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes.
Can I make a quick comment? And
Yes,
this
ma'am,
probably is
4-0.
not the place, but it will be very quick. Please have someone go out and look at the condition of the light poles that are at Park Avenue and Macomb and Jefferson and Macomb, because literally the paint is just absolutely peeling off of there. I see Rob McGarrett over there. It's pretty seriously in bad shape. Yeah, it's, so, thanks.
Thank you. The other item we wanted to bring to your attention, we've been in discussions with the Leon County Sheriff's Office, and they're requesting an update to their aerial field cameras. We use those cameras for law enforcement purposes, and then also to make surveys on our transmission and distribution lines. I'm sorry, our substations and transmission lines, and they've brought it to our attention that they are going to replace that camera equipment this year as part of the fiscal year 19 budget cycle. We'll bring that as part of the capital recommendations so that we can include ourselves in that cost-sharing agreement. And we're finalizing what the actual investment is and then what the actual cost-sharing agreement is, but we want to provide confidence to the sheriff that we're going to address that in this coming year's budget. We've come to the point where, we've got 10 formal public opportunities for community involvement in the budget. We're publishing data online for community involvement. We've got upcoming budget meetings that are planned. Today's meeting, May 9th, we'll come back with a second quarter update and talk about some more expectations for the fiscal year 19 budget. June, we'll have another budget workshop where we'll talk about the millage rate, firming that up so that when we reach the point of certifying and notifying the property appraiser and the tax collector, we'll have that vote in place. July, we'll have balanced budgets. July 11th, and also a third quarter budget update. And then in September, we'll have our 2 public hearings. I believe also with that July 11th, we'll have public comment on the budget at that point also. So we've accomplished quite a bit. We're about the halfway point, and some final numbers that are coming together in the next few commission meetings. So I thank you for your support, and if you have any questions or recommendations for the fiscal year 19 budget, please let me know.
Commissioner Richardson, followed by Commissioner Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I'd like for us to consider as we move forward with our fiscal year 18 budget is additional funding for Tempo. I know we did put additional funding in, but with the success of that program, I'm sure they're still woefully understaffed, with Dr. Thomas being the only staff person heading up that program. And so I'd like for us to, I don't know what his exact needs are at this point, but maybe we could take a look at that and adding some funding to that program, which, again, is on the other end of the spectrum to what we've discussed here this afternoon. I wanted to ask where we are in terms of the timeline for the fire service contract. I remember when I first came to the commission, we had finalized that contract, and it was coming to us for final approval. But there was a recommendation for a fire station in the area of Lake Bradford Road and Stuckey Street. And my concern at the time was that was an area where the response time, there was a greater, there were more calls for service, longer response times, and I think in that area there's some of the older homes, wood frame homes, that when they go up in a hurry. And so I was real interested in, but couldn't do anything at the time, in addressing that need in that area. And I was told that when the contract came up again, that maybe we could have that discussion. So I was interested in knowing where we are at this point. It's been almost 4 years now, if not right at 4 years. And
the contract is in its third of the 5-year period.
Okay.
2020 so is the end of that.
Okay.
That period of time, and we can specifically speak with fire about giving us an update on fire stations and what plans are there for the future in their capital budget.
So the discussion on that contract itself may not start for another year or so?
Correct. There are options in that agreement to extend the agreement, to amend the agreement, in order to revisit the agreement, and we'll be working on that.
All right. I just wanted to make sure I was staying on top of that, because that was one of my priorities when I came to the commission 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago.
Commissioner Miller.
On that note, a few years ago, fire got a grant to go in to each home and check make sure everybody had fire alert thingies. Yeah, thank you very much, smoke detectors. And they had phenomenal results. When they did that, they went from being it was in an area where they had a very, very high number of calls, and when they did this, the calls dropped down to 0. So I don't know whether that's a yearly thing that they are able to do. If they are not able to do it and they are dependent on grants for that, I'd suggest that we maybe look at including that, and always look at the area of highest calls and go and work in those neighborhoods. And I think that it informs people, the person's in the home, interacting with the homeowner or the resident, and also is safer. So that is something I think if you wouldn't mind looking into that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next. Yes, I just want to make sure that in case, I want to make sure that just because somebody doesn't mention something, that it doesn't fall out of the budget. Okay. So I'm mentioning here, that we've determined a couple years ago we were going to really try to do our catch-up game on roads and sidewalk maintenance. And I want to make sure that money is still in the budget, and that you're following the, they've gone out and bought equipment, done all this data gathering, and I think there should be a list that they're following, and those recommendations we heard about last year at the I guess it was just a presentation at a workshop. So just making sure it's still in there. Thank you.
One of our assumptions is an investment is for public infrastructure. We identified $5 million 2 years ago, increased it to $6.5 million in this budget cycle, and public infrastructure is working that plan that they have in achieving their goals. Okay. And we'll assume that for 19 also.
Commissioner.
Mr. Mayor, what I'd like to do is highlight some of the highlights of this budget. We don't always get the benefit of, depending on the media, to highlight those things that we are doing right in the city of Tallahassee, the good things that are happening. And I tell people all the time that not only is our interim city manager keeping the ship afloat and stable, but he's moving it forward. He and the staff that he has to work with. And I'm proud of the city of Tallahassee and the services that we provide for our citizens. And if we don't tell our own story, it's a poor frog that doesn't croak about his own pond. And so, I'm real excited about what we've done, particularly as it relates to our budget and the services that we provide. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those things so that those watching will hear it. And then we can ourselves provide that kind of information for our public so that they know and can weigh that against some of the misinformation that maybe they get from other sources. But you talked about the fact that we've reduced city government by 56 positions. Rarely do we hear people talking about that. That was significant. It was painful. But it was something that we had to do. We were able to address an over $4 million deficit without considering a tax increase, and we did it through eliminating cost in government. That, to me, is significant. While at the same time, we've added 16 firefighters to our staff, 52 police officers. We've seen a 14% reduction in violent crime in our community as a result of our priority for public safety and adding those 52 positions, and we're not done there yet. We established a living wage for the city of Tallahassee. As we know, a working couple cannot live off minimum wage, but we made that commitment to our employees and set the example, I hope, for other employees in our local community and around the state to provide a living wage for its employees. When we're compared to comparable cities, our municipal costs are lower than 10 of the 11 other cities of comparable size that we're compared to. That is significant because we cost our taxpayers less to provide the same services, probably at a higher quality than those other cities that we're compared to. That is absolutely significant and I think needs to be highlighted. Our bond rating, our AA bond rating, Mr. Treasurer Clerk, as you know, that saves us in terms of what we have to pay when we go out to the market to borrow money. It may be insider baseball to us, but our citizens need to know that. That means that we are being fiscally responsible and garnering that AAA bond rating. And then lastly, our deficiency fund is fully funded. I know when I came to the commission, that was an issue. Again, it's insider baseball, but that's significant. And these are the things that our general citizenry needs to know about. And again, if we can't depend on our general media to do it all the time, and I give them credit for what they do, but we've got the ability to get this information out to the general public, and I think we should. It's a good news story, and we need to tell it and tell it accurately. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well said. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, if there are no other comments or questions, and there are no speakers that have come in at this point, we'll be in adjournment until the regular City Commission meeting.